Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 35. The Reality Filter. Why only some patterns become our world. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. We now continue our profound journey through Episode 8, the pure abstract language of the Holophase audio series, moving to Part 35, the Reality Filter, in Book 8.9, The Bridge to Physics. We have built our bridge. We understand the gap between perfect abstraction and physical implementation. We have our translation manual, our dictionary mapping phi symbols to measurable quantities. We have seen how the language of phi, in principle, can describe any coherent pattern that has time, space, and motion woven into it. Today, we pause at the very center of this bridge and ask a question that shifts the whole picture. If the phi language can describe any coherent pattern with temporal, spatial, and motional structure, why does our universe contain only some of these patterns and not others? Why is our world so specific, so narrow, compared to the infinite possibility space of the language? Why do we see electrons, protons, and photons, but not an endless zoo of other particle types? Why do forces in our universe follow very particular mathematical forms, like the inverse square law for gravity and electromagnetism, instead of a random variety of laws? Why does light in vacuum have one fixed speed, not a whole spectrum of allowed maximum speeds? Why do we experience exactly three spatial dimensions we can move through, and one time dimension we flow along, instead of 17 or 2 or some constantly changing number? In short, what filters the infinite possibilities of the abstract language down to the particular reality we actually experience? What is the reality filter that chooses, not from outside phi, but from within phi's own possibilities, which patterns get to become the furniture of our world? This is the story of the reality filter. It is not about what can exist in principle inside the infinite library of phi's patterns. It is about what actually appears as a stable, persistent part of the universe we inhabit. 1. The story core, the infinite library and the living stories. To feel this deeply, imagine again an unimaginable library. It is infinite. Its shelves stretch beyond sight in every direction. It contains every book that could ever be written in any language that respects basic grammar. There are books of nonsense, books of random symbols, books of perfect logic, books of dreams. One wing of this library contains all grammatically correct English sentences. Another wing contains all possible scientific theories written in mathematical symbols. Another wing contains all possible descriptions of universes. Universes where gravity is stronger, universes with no gravity at all, universes with 5 time dimensions, universes where thoughts immediately reshape physical matter. This great library is like the full abstract space of phi. Every coherent configuration of phi and its derivatives, every allowed pattern in the holophase language, corresponds to one book somewhere on these shelves. Now walk along the shelves and pull out books at random. Most of them are strange. Many of them are unreadable. Some begin sensibly and then immediately spin into chaos. Some describe a universe where everything happens at once and then nothing ever changes again. Some describe a world that lasts for one instant and then disappears. But a few of these books are different. When you open them, The story is not just a static arrangement of letters, it has a kind of internal life. Characters appear, persist, and develop. There are structures that maintain themselves, cycles that repeat, themes that return. The story has coherence over time. Our universe, in this picture, is one of these living books in the library of all possible phi stories. The reality filter is like the selection process that distinguishes between a story that can live, breathe, and continue, and a story that collapses into silence or noise as soon as it begins. In phi language, every mathematically well-defined configuration is a sentence or a book. The reality filter asks, which of these sentences can support stable patterns, interactions, and observers? Which phi patterns can in fact become a world and not just a frozen snapshot or a brief spasm? Only those pass through. 2. Linguistic role: the editor and the publisher. Within our language metaphor, the reality filter plays the role of a strict editor, or better, the whole publishing house that decides which manuscripts ever see the light of day. Anyone can write a manuscript. In the same way, the phi language allows an incredible variety of patterns. But only a tiny fraction of all possible manuscripts get printed, distributed, and read. Why? Because the publisher has criteria. For a manuscript to be accepted, it must be internally coherent. It must be possible to print with the available ink and paper. It must be understandable to readers, and it must be worth reading. Books made of random letters may technically be allowed strings of characters, but they are not treated as real stories. The reality filter is something like this for phi. It does not deny that a wild pattern exists in the abstract language, but it refuses to promote that pattern to the status of a world unless it meets certain conditions. These conditions include stability. The pattern must not destroy itself immediately. Implementability. The pattern must be compatible with the basic dynamics of phi, so it can actually appear. Observability. The pattern must create regularities that other patterns can respond to and measure. Regularity. There must be repeatable aspects, not only one-off accidents. And boundedness. Things must not instantly explode to infinity or collapse to complete nothingness. In this way, the reality filter is the difference between all the sentences that could in principle be written and the much smaller set of sentences that actually get spoken, heard, and remembered inside the universe. 3. Scientific essence: from possibility to actuality. From a scientific point of view, the reality filter turns the philosophical question, what could exist, into the physical question, what actually exists and why? It asks us to look at the infinite menu of possible phi patterns and identify the conditions that select the small subset we see. One simple example is planetary motion. The underlying phi-based description of gravity allows an infinite variety of possible trajectories for a small body around a heavier one. There are perfect circles, stretched ellipses, parabolas, hyperbolas, spirals, and wildly irregular paths. All of these are mathematically allowed. Yet when we actually look at planets, asteroids, and moons in our solar system, we mostly see bounded, repeating orbits, ellipses that go round and round with small perturbations. Why? The answer is the reality filter at work through stability. Orbits that are too wild either crash into the central body or escape into space. Paths that require exact, infinitely precise initial conditions are destroyed by even tiny disturbances. Only the orbits that are dynamically stable, that come back on themselves in a regular way, persist long enough to become part of the long-term structure of the solar system. The gravitational dynamics, combined with energy and angular momentum conservation, filter out nearly everything except stable closed orbits and a handful of escape trajectories. Now scale this idea up. The entire space of phi patterns is like the space of all possible orbits, but in a vastly larger space. The reality filter is like the combination of conservation laws, stability criteria, and consistency conditions that select which of these patterns can endure and self-organize into a world. This is not magic. It is the simple recognition that being mathematically possible is not the same as being physically realized. The filter is everything that stands between those two. 4. Dimensional expression, filtering across time, space, and motion. As always, we must respect the triunity of time, space, and motion. The reality filter is not a purely temporal, or purely spatial, or purely motional thing. It is a combined effect across all three echoes. Along the time echo, the filter expresses itself as stability over duration. Patterns that grow without bound, or that oscillate with ever increasing amplitude, or that collapse to nothing in an instant, do not make good building blocks for a universe. Only patterns that remain bounded, or that approach stable cycles or equilibrium, can serve as a foundation for complex structures. A world of pure explosions and instant decays would never have time to form anything like atoms, stars, or living beings. Along the space echo, the filter expresses itself as localization and manageable gradients. A pattern that is infinitely sharp in space, like an exact mathematical point with infinite field strength, is typically unphysical. So is a pattern that is perfectly uniform everywhere, with no structure at all. Real physical patterns tend to be somewhere in the middle, localized enough to be distinct, but spread out enough to avoid infinite energies. The reality filter disfavors patterns with pathological spatial behavior and selects those with feasible field profiles. Along the motion echo, the filter expresses itself as consistency of change. Motion patterns that allow faster than light signaling, or that create closed loops in time with contradictions, or that require infinite acceleration in finite time, are filtered out by consistency conditions. Motion must be compatible with causality, with the finite speed of information transfer, and with the other patterns it interacts with. To pass the reality filter, a phi pattern must satisfy all three: temporal stability, spatial reasonableness, and motional consistency. A pattern that passes only one or two of these tests may exist as a brief fluctuation in the abstract space, but it will not become part of a durable, observable world. Phi, position in the master tree, climate for the tree of patterns within the master tree of the Holophase language. The reality filter acts not as a new branch, but as the climate in which the tree grows. The tree itself represents all the abstract structures the phi language can form: derivatives, waveforms, topological features, quadratic measures, resonance structures, information constraints. The reality filter is like the combination of sunlight, soil, water, and wind in an ecosystem. It does not change the genetic possibilities of the tree, but it strongly shapes which branches flourish, which leaves actually appear, and which fruits can ripen. In a harsh climate, only certain shapes survive. In a rich climate, others flourish. Likewise, in a universe with certain initial conditions, global symmetries, and dynamical rules, only certain phi patterns will pass the stability and implementability conditions. The rest remain as unrealized possibilities, like seeds that never sprout. This view gives a powerful way to think about physical law. The laws of physics are not arbitrary equations imposed from outside the tree. They are the growth patterns that have proven stable and self-reinforcing in the specific climate of our universe. The reality filter is the reason those particular laws, and not countless others, became the effective description of the world. 6. Relations to neighbors, filtering every concept. The reality filter touches every abstract concept we have introduced. For topological structures like knots and braids in phi, the filter asks which of them are topologically protected and dynamically stable. Some knots can be untied by small continuous deformations. Others cannot. Only the stable ones are good candidates to appear as robust entities like particles or flux tubes. Unstable knots are filtered out. They fall apart into simpler patterns. For holonomy and memory-like effects, the filter demands gauge invariance and physical measurability. Abstractly, many path-dependent quantities can be defined. Physically, only those that survive changes of description and can be detected by interference or coupling to other patterns are promoted to observables. The reality filter keeps only the holonomies that correspond to real, measurable phase shifts and discards those that are mere bookkeeping artifacts. For quadratic forms and intensities, the filter selects those that are conserved or approximately conserved. Many possible ways of combining derivatives into positive quantities exist in the abstract language, but only some behave like meaningful currencies that track something through time. Energy, momentum, and charge densities are examples of intensities that survive the filter because they have clear continuity relations. Arbitrary quadratic forms that do not obey continuity laws are filtered out as unhelpful and physically irrelevant. For spectral modes, the filter favors those that can be excited in the actual conditions of our universe. There may be extremely high frequency modes of phi that are mathematically allowed, but practically never populated because the energy required is beyond what the cosmos provides. Those modes exist in the abstract tree, but the reality filter keeps them unexcited, like unused notes on a huge cosmic instrument. Even computation universality feels the filter. In principle, phi can implement any computation. In practice, only computations that can be performed within finite time and available energy will ever occur. The reality filter quietly forbids the universe from being a place where impossible computations are routinely carried out. 7. Semantic meaning. How the filter gives a world its character. On the level of meaning, the reality filter explains why our world has a particular character, rather than being an arbitrary sample from an infinite menu. It explains why we can have chemistry at all. The filter selects a range of force strengths, particle masses, and dimensionalities that allow atoms and molecules to form and persist. If electric forces were much weaker or stronger, or if space had a different number of dimensions, the spectrum of stable atoms would be very different, or perhaps non-existent. Our actual periodic table is a fingerprint of the reality filter. It explains why we can have stars and galaxies. Only certain combinations of gravity strength, expansion rate, and matter content lead to a universe where matter can clump, ignite, burn, and recycle. Too fast expansion and nothing forms. Too strong collapse and everything falls into black holes. Our cosmic web is another imprint of selection. It explains why we can have life and consciousness. The filter favors regimes where complex information processing structures can form within a bounded temperature range, with stable molecules, reliable energy flows, and robust feedback loops. Worlds where everything is frozen, or everything is plasma, or everything decays too quickly would not host long chains of self-aware phi patterns. In this way, the reality filter does not just select patterns. It also quietly explains why those patterns support experience, meaning, and observation. It is the hidden reason our universe feels like a place where stories can be told and remembered. 8. Stability and falsifiability. When reality defies the filter. Because the reality filter makes strong claims about what patterns can and cannot appear, it also opens the door to clear falsification. If we can identify patterns that are reliably realized in our universe, but that appear to be grossly incompatible with any plausible stability and implementability criteria in the phi framework, then the holophase picture would be in trouble. For example, suppose our analysis of topological stability in phi shows that only certain discrete charges should be possible, and we predict that no stable particle can have a fractional charge smaller than 1/3 of the electron's charge. If experiments then find a whole family of stable fundamental particles with 1/5 or 1/7 of that charge, and if every attempt to reinterpret those findings within the phi framework fails, we would face a real crisis. Either our understanding of the stability conditions is incomplete, or our mapping from phi patterns to charge is wrong, or the assumption that the single holophase language underlies all of physics is false. The reality filter here would have mispredicted what patterns can appear. Likewise, if our framework insists that all fundamental interactions must be derivable from an action principle as a kind of optimality or consistency condition in phi, and if we discover a basic force of nature that provably cannot be written in that way, then the reality filter has again failed. It would mean that at least some of our universe's regularities are not the result of the stability habits of phi, but something outside that story. These are not abstract worries. They are specific doors where the theory invites the world to disagree. The fact that, so far, known interactions do arise from action principles and observed charges fit into quantized patterns is encouraging. But the possibility of being wrong remains, and that is what makes this filter scientifically meaningful rather than just a poetic idea. 9. Examples across scales. Seeing the filter at work. You can see the reality filter in action in simple physical systems all around you. Watch a soap film stretched across a wireframe. The film could assume many shapes in principle, but the shape you actually see is the one that minimizes surface area for the given boundary. That is the stable configuration. All other shapes are filtered out by surface tension. The pattern that survives is the one that passes the stability test. Watch a stream flowing around a rock. The water could move in endless, chaotic ways, but you often see stable vortices form behind the rock, patterns that persist for seconds or minutes. These vortices are solutions to the fluid equations that balance inertia and viscosity. They are allowed and stabilized by the dynamics. Other patterns are too fragile and are washed away. Look up at a clear night sky. The distribution of stars and galaxies is not random. It reflects the amplification of certain initial fluctuations and the damping of others in the early universe. The cosmic reality filter, acting through gravity and expansion, selected specific modes to grow and others to shrink. Even in your own mind, the filter is visible. Out of all possible thoughts you could have, only some become stable patterns of belief or memory. Ideas that cannot be integrated with your existing structures or that lead to too much internal conflict are often discarded. Your brain has its own reality filter that selects which patterns of neural activity become part of your lasting sense of self and world. X. Human analogies, natural selection, craft, and conversation. To make this still more intuitive, it helps to rest in a few simple analogies. The first is natural selection. Think of 5 patterns as all possible genetic variations, and the reality filter as the environment. The environment does not design creatures from scratch. It simply creates conditions where some variations survive and reproduce while others do not. Over time, this filtering produces the rich diversity of life we see. In a similar way, the dynamics and constraints of phi do not design specific universes by hand. They merely favor certain stable patterns. Those patterns accumulate and compose, producing the structured cosmos we inhabit. The second is craft. A potter can shape clay into many forms, but only some shapes will survive the kiln or hold water without cracking. The laws of material strength and thermal expansion act as filters. Over time, potters learn which shapes the clay and fire will accept and which they will reject. The catalog of traditional pottery forms is the record of patterns that passed the filter. In the holophase picture, the material is phi itself, and the kiln is the interplay of its own equations. The third is conversation. In a group discussion, many possible sentences could be spoken, but the actual conversation is shaped by shared context, attention, and relevance. Random strings of words are possible, but they are ignored. Comments that connect, clarify, or deepen the topic survive and guide the flow. The conversation filters itself. Likewise, the universe can be seen as phi talking to itself. Only patterns that make sense dynamically and structurally continue the conversation. The rest fade away. 11. Recognition skill. Training your eye for the filter. You can train yourself to notice the reality filter in everyday life by asking one simple question again and again. Why this pattern and not some other? When you see a rainbow, recognize that the laws of refraction and dispersion filter the sunlight into a very particular arrangement of colors and angles. When you see a crystal, realize that the lattice structure is not one arbitrary option, but the outcome of energy minimization and symmetry constraints. When you see the spiral arms of a galaxy in a photograph, understand them as patterns that have been reinforced by density waves and rotation, while other arrangements of matter have been smoothed out. This way of seeing turns the world into a kind of living demonstration of the filter. Everywhere you look, you see survivors of countless invisible tests. Stability tests, consistency tests, implementability tests. You start to feel that the universe you experience is not generic, but highly selected. Return to phi. One field, many surviving stories. At the end of this part, we return once more to the central picture. There is one field, phi, endlessly capable of forming patterns through its derivatives. In principle, it can write an infinite variety of stories, but not every story can become a living world. The reality filter is the name we give to phi's own habits of stability, consistency, and mutual compatibility. It is how phi decides which of its possible stories are sustainable. The filter is not an extra ingredient added to phi. It is what happens when phi is allowed to run its full dynamics, with patterns interacting, colliding, and evolving. Fragile structures disappear. Contradictory ones never fully form. Only patterns that fit together, hold together, and support further patterning remain. If you want to explore the formal side of this story, you can look into the mathematical study of stability in field equations, of attractors in dynamical systems, and of topological protection in condensed matter and quantum field theories. In the Holophase program, these tools become ways of writing the reality filter in precise terms. Which phi configurations are attractors, which are repellers, which are structurally stable under small perturbations. Zooming out, remember the full arc of Episode 8. We began with the pure abstract language of phi. We unfolded its grammar, its structures, its capacity to encode any coherent pattern. We built a bridge from language to physics through implementation and mapping. Now, in part 35, we have understood why not every abstract pattern becomes a world. There is a filter emerging from phi itself that selects patterns capable of being real, stable, and knowable. From here, we are ready to move fully into physics. In the coming parts, we will no longer speak only in the abstract. We will watch as specific filtered phi patterns are given names like mass, charge, spin, field, wave, particle. We will see how the one language of phi, after passing through the mapping and the filter, becomes the concrete universe we observe. For now, rest in this understanding. You are living inside one of phi's surviving stories. The laws you see, the patterns you find beautiful, the regularities you depend on, are all the result of a deep and continuous selection. Out of all that could have been written in the language of phi, this is the tale that was strong enough to last. 13. The reality filter and your own journey. As we close this part, notice that the same logic that shapes galaxies also quietly shapes your path. Out of all the careers you could pursue, all the friendships you could form, all the ideas you could follow, only some combinations are stable, nourishing, and self-consistent for you. In that sense, your life is also passing through a filter of possibilities. The habits you strengthen, the environments you choose, and the values you return to again and again all act like selection rules. They allow certain patterns of thought, feeling, and action to grow, while others fall away. When you align your choices with what is coherent, meaningful, and sustainable, you are, in a very real way, cooperating with the same deep logic that lets stars burn steadily and atoms remain intact. You are allowing phi, through you, to write another stable and beautiful chapter in its ongoing story. Salam, and peace be upon you.